Hello and welcome to what episode are we on now? Right, 13, I think.
I don't know.
Not keeping track. Today in the co-pilot seat we have a hard surface prodigy, one of three
No.
victims to the only redlined episode of Shigutocast, Ryferion Entertainment, aka Ryferion. Good evening.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing pretty okay.
Nice. Me too. This is actually, I think this is the first episode we've recorded in the evening, which is
Yeah.
kind of nice because we usually do them in the afternoon.
And I'm usually still asleep in the afternoon.
Yeah, and people are in between classes or just getting home from work, but end of the day, everything else is out of mind. It's kind of nice. With us today, we have a technical fellow at Roblox, a Hack Week mastermind, Russia's own, Arseny SIGGRAPH. Did I pronounce it right? I think I messed it up.
Good one. Happy to be here.
Really happy to have you. Yeah, we were talking earlier. I wasn't sure where to say you're from because I know you're pretty nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah, I am from Russia. I've spent most of my life, I guess, there. All the way through, I guess I was 20 when I left, 20 something. So yeah, I still consider myself to be Russian more than any other sort of country, but I do feel pretty at home in a few different countries that I've lived at. So it's more of country of origin, not necessarily home as such.
Of course, yeah, and yeah, I mean, you lived in my home country, Canada, for quite a bit, which is nice to hear. But and it was nice to hear that you enjoyed it as well. That means a lot. But yeah, we got some questions for you, some questions of our own, and then we're gonna jump into some Reddit questions. If you guys want to go and leave a question for our next guest, who we don't have another guest lined up for next week because we're pretty backlogged on episodes right now. But when we do, you can go to twitter.com/Shiguto_RBX or r/Shiguto, and you'll be the first to know. But we're just gonna jump right into it. I wanted to start off. I usually try to find little quotes here and there from people over interviews you've had. And in 2016, you were interviewed by Them Magazines, who asked you what you think the future of Roblox will be, and you said that you think you already have the core, but it will be the Roblox you know today, but much bigger, better, and shinier. And I like that quote because when I was reading your commemoration post for 8 years working with Roblox, where you listed off all your proudest achievements, a lot of the titles included words like cleanup or update. And I think it shows that you guys take a lot of pride in improving on old ideas and making sure that at the end of the day, it is still the Roblox that we knew from 2016 or the years past, just with better content and better features and better podcasts. But do you guys think you've succeeded in keeping that core essence over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think so. So I've come to Roblox in 2012, which at this point there were already people who were there were already users, right, who were with Roblox for 5 years. So at that point, it didn't feel very impressive as like you come to Roblox, it feels like an established platform. There's a lot of people who have opinions about what it should be, what it was, what it will be. But yeah, when I look at this back now, it's kind of interesting. I think in a lot of ways, Roblox in 2012 was very, very, very different. But it's not. I feel like what we have today is a very substantial evolution, but it's hard to say that it has been completely redefined in the sense that, right, you can look at the features that we had, you can look at the sort of patterns that happened on the platform, and there's a few things that have changed. The biggest thing being DevX, probably. The biggest thing is that in 2012, people didn't really consider Roblox to be a platform where you do business, and now, a lot of people do. But other than that, a lot of, types of people who create content on the platform, in many cases, reasons why people do things. I just want to make something that I've always dreamed of making, or I want to experiment with this interesting idea that I have. Like, a lot of these things are still there. So I think in that sense, I still believe that even though I don't actually remember the interview, but the internet remembers. So I feel like we have followed the path pretty well. In some ways, though, it's an interesting challenge, right? So there's people who you would ask about Roblox, and I would be like, 2007 was the year where Roblox peaked, and now it's all downhill, right? And I feel like some of them, at some point, in some way, it's just a meme, right? But I feel like in some way, Roblox has changed, and maybe not everybody is super comfortable with the change, right? There are things that were maybe more appealing to some people. I feel like some people may not be very happy about the fact that Roblox is a platform where you can do business. I am super happy about this, and I see a lot of people who make a living. I see a lot of people whose lives Roblox has changed, not just through growing up with it as a kid, but carrying that through adulthood as well. So that I think is fantastic. But for some people, I think there could be a notion that it was more pure back in the day, if that makes sense, right? You would create for the sake of creation. But just like balance and all things. So, but what I wanted to say is that it is a bit hard, right? So there is Roblox that everybody has their own, I guess, idea of what Roblox is to them, and it is a bit hard to equalize sort of places where we want to go with the platform versus what people think of the platform today, right? And there is cases where these different ideas can clash, and it's hard. Like a lot of the avatar explorations that we have done over the last 2 years showed that it's complicated. Like a lot of people are super attached to this very specific. It's like, okay, Roblox avatars have a specific style, they have a specific identity. Roblox must stick with that identity. But at the same time, if you don't innovate, it's hard to move forward, right? And then it's hard to say, well, I'm an 18-year-old or 19-year-old and I'm still happy with my avatar that looks like a bunch of blocks. So there's definitely cases where I just think it's legitimately a very hard problem. How do you find the balance between kind of respecting the legacy and moving forward? But I feel like by and large, though, I'm very happy with, in general, kind of what Roblox has become, and definitely with the work that the entire team has done over all of these years.
Yeah, I think most of us in this group are pretty happy with what's been done because a lot of us are showcase builders. So, we get all these cool lighting updates and PBR materials. It's like, ooh, I enjoy that. I wanted to talk a bit about last RDC. You did a talk called Beyond the Veil, where you gave us a deeper look into the Roblox engine. Your closing remarks included that every time someone asks themselves, why hasn't Roblox implemented this feature yet? Or why don't they do this? Because it'll make my game look so cool. Sometimes it's a matter of not having an effective implementation strategy or concerns with longevity and so on. So is there any overly ambitious ideas you've had that just weren't right for the time and maybe you got to let sit in the oven for a bit?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like in a way, if my habits are anything to go by, it feels like many of them are in this style, in that it's hard. Like you would notice that there's a lot of time that passes between some of the projects that I do and them actually being released to production, and a lot of this is not because people aren't excited about them internally or anything like this. It's because there's a big difference between doing a proof of concept that gets people excited and having a production version of this. Like Future is Bright was hard. It still is. We haven't fully shipped it. It's sort of live, but we are still working through performance challenges and things like that. So yeah, there's a few examples like this. There is examples that that feel simple. It's funny. There are some projects that from the outside perspective look really simple, and there are some projects that look really complicated. But when you look at these things internally, sometimes it's almost reversed. I don't know that I have an example of something that from the outside perspective looks amazing, but internally was actually pretty simple. I'm not sure. I would need to think about this, but there's definitely examples in the opposite direction. So one big challenge that we have, right, is that we run basically on every single device that you can possibly have, and this is, so we've talked a bit about the different perceptions and kind of, what is a good Roblox. For some people, I think this is an uncomfortable reality for some people on the platform, because if you're used to playing AAA games on your PlayStation 4 or like desktop PC with RTX 2080 Ti, you could be looking at this and being like, yeah, I can see what people can do, what the state of the art is today, and it's kind of sad that Roblox isn't there. From our perspective, though, it's hard because we really value sort of ease of use, not just ease of use, but the more people we can get any game in hands of, the better. The better it is for us, the better it is for creators. Fundamentally, this is all about that. So reach is super important. And then, we end up dealing with harsh reality, such as older devices, older mobile devices are particularly challenging. And then you look at some of the features that we work on, and there's a happy compromise. It's like we can downscale it, we can disable certain effects, which is fantastic. Like we ship depth of field without really any challenges because it's a cosmetic effect. You can, some people might try to use it. I think there was a game on RDC Game Jam actually that used depth of field for gameplay purposes, but in general, right, you disable it, you're good. So there's like simple and stupid examples. I think the most interesting stupid example people have been asking for a while, and we are actually working on this now because we think we found like a reasonable implementation path. But people have been asking for good ways to sort of highlight an object, to maybe draw an outline around an object, maybe that's visible through the objects in front of it, etc. This is super useful for gameplay effects, right? You want to have an armor pickup or any interactive object really in the game, and sometimes you want to render it in a very special way. And it seems so trivial of a feature, but then you start thinking, okay, that needs to work on all of the devices, and I won't go into details because they are intricate, but not on all of the devices. Like many methods don't work on some devices because of capabilities. Many methods don't work on some devices just because it's slow. You have a phone with a pretty high resolution screens, as phones usually tend to do these days, and then not very powerful hardware. And this is an effect that's gameplay critical, so we can't disable this. So there's things like this that sometimes just take a lot of time because we are a platform that maximizes reach in this way, right? So I don't know if this answers it. I guess this is maybe slightly different direction from what you were asking. There are some things that we want to do that are super visually interesting, that are also hard for certain other reasons. Maybe one interesting example, and again, we are working on a lot of these things. We have internal prototypes, but some of these things take years. So Features Bright 3 took a lot of time, right? But our next big thing on that general train of thought is global illumination. And it's tough. It's tough for somewhat similar reasons. So in AAA industry, games from the past generation, so from PlayStation 3 era, roughly speaking, they almost game did dynamic global illumination. In almost all games, you can bake GI if your levels are static, or you cannot have it. Neither of these are great for us. So Roblox worlds tend to be super dynamic, and even when you don't use physics simulation or anything like this, I want to make a procedurally generated level, or I have this door that happens to open, or I have this wall that happens to blow up when something specific happens in the game, right? And all of these things are super cool from the gameplay perspective, and it's valuable for us to make sure that they can be made effortlessly as a creator. But then they fight some of these features where we now say, well, we can't actually pre-compute anything, really. So when we talk about global illumination, it has to be dynamic. And then there's a lot of other challenges along sort of that line. So in the industry outside of Roblox, there are reasonable solutions to this problem now. They're not perfect, unfortunately, but there are reasonable ones. And so this is one of these projects that, it would be awesome to have done. I think it would significantly improve the quality of lighting that we have beyond sort of what we already do. But it is going to be a challenge just because it's a hard problem, right? So like this is an example of a problem that's just genuinely really hard. There's there's not an answer to this problem that is like anywhere in any existing engine that is completely satisfactory.
Yeah, it makes sense to have to understand that in order to have a platform that's accessible to, low-end devices all the way up to high-end devices, something like GI would be understandably just very difficult to, I guess, even like comprehend.
It is hard. Now, it's not hopeless, right? In that, again, for some effects, we can scale them down. For some effects, maybe we can disable them completely. But even this gets interesting. So one of the challenges that we had with Futures by 3 is that you can't run this new lighting system everywhere. And so you have to disable it on certain devices. But now you have to think about things like, what's the color balance of this level between different lighting systems that we support? Because if it's completely different, it's going to be really painful for developers to tune all of this. You design your level for one setup, and then on some users' device, the system that we use is different, so your level doesn't look right. We don't want you to design the level, the lighting for the level twice, if only for the reason that maybe there's going to be a third lighting system in the future, right? So some things we can sort of paper over, but at some point there has to be a reasonable fallbacks for these like older devices, right? Which again, when you talk about games outside of Roblox, a lot of them have a luxury of saying, well, this is a game for desktop and consoles. It just doesn't run on mobile. And then the game that runs on mobile may be from the same franchise. It's been done by a different studio in a different engine with different art assets, and it's just a different game. But we don't want to do this, in part because, ironically, so one thing actually that changed since 2012 in a very substantial way is mobile, right? So in 2012, we were just starting. And then I think we shipped a mobile version like end of 2012 for iOS. And it was an uphill battle trying to get developers to care about mobile, to be honest, right? Because, a lot of people had a perception that it's not serious, right? Mobile is where like 2D scrollers like Flappy Bird work, and then I don't want to work on games like this. But interestingly, we kind of broke through. Roblox was, I think, one of the biggest probably games that really said, we can have a 3D game with a 3D gameplay, right? Like full 3D camera, character movement, etc., on mobile, on a phone, on tablet, and people are going to be okay with that. So that changed very substantially between then and now. I forgot why I was bringing this up. I kind of lost the train of thought. But anyway, it's a complicated landscape, so it's a bit hard to design technology for that in such a way that it actually will work reasonably everywhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, and I was just gonna tack on a point of like, since I studied computer engineering, and I've taken a few graphic classes where I think, we had to rasterize a sphere, and just doing that simple task of like, hey, render a sphere with Phong shading, which is very old, took about like a week and a half because I couldn't figure out how to get, this certain light to work or even a spotlight to appear on the ball. And I guess tackling that sort of small issue kind of gives me a perspective on how a larger platform like Roblox has to combine. I'm assuming because mobile devices render differently than PC. Like, I read somewhere that you guys use Metal, right, to render
Yeah,
games.
we use Metal on iOS, we use Vulkan on Android. We are lucky in that it's not a completely divergent architecture, in the sense that, it's not like we have to redo everything for mobile. That thankfully is not the case. But there is a fair amount of differences between how mobile GPUs tend to work and how desktop GPUs tend to work. But yeah, there is an amazing amount of, in general, technology in all of this, right? So you mentioned, like rasterizing a sphere with Phong shading from scratch. It's somewhat non-trivial. Like if you know exactly what you're doing, it's not actually that much code to write, but there's so much knowledge under that very simple task, right? And then what we do is it is very difficult. So there's issues like this, right, where just like the math may be challenging, or maybe the algorithms are challenging. There's also a lot of other practical issues they're kind of man-made, in the sense that there's nothing intrinsic about the problem that is so difficult, in a sense. But one thing that we struggle with is that so on any platform, really, it doesn't have to be mobile, you never work with the graphics card directly. you always work through a driver. You work through a driver, you work through graphics API, right? So you mentioned Metal. There's other graphics APIs as well that we have to support. But then you work through a driver, and there's this deep stack. So whenever something goes wrong, sometimes somebody would report a bug where there's some weird pattern on the screen on some specific device in Roblox game, right? And you have to kind of unwind this. So the thing that actually happens is the graphics hardware on that device produces a picture that is wrong. What is feeding data into that hardware is the driver that we haven't written, that we can't control, and also that we don't know. We know a fair amount through, reading papers and conferences, just sort of talking to other people in the industry, etc. But it's not like there's a source for that. It's not like you can debug that. It's kind of a black box. Then on top of this, there's the graphics API, and then on top of this, there's our code. And you don't get control over some of this. So we sometimes deal with issues like, oh, hey, somebody has a device that has a driver that's old, right? And this driver seems to have a problem, but we can't fix the drivers for people. And again, going back to Reach, right? What is super important for us, but also challenging, is Roblox should just work. Like, there shouldn't be a case where you run Roblox and you see these weird bugs, or there shouldn't be a case where you run Roblox and it runs at like 5 FPS on a relatively simple scene. But when issues like this are outside of our control, we have to find ways to work around this. So this stack is super deep, both as technology and also as knowledge, right? There is like hundreds of person years of knowledge, research, software. All of that accumulates and allows us to produce the pictures that we can. And in one way, it's very empowering, because like if we had to do everything ourselves, it would be very difficult. But on the other hand, you have to deal with a lot of things that you don't control and don't always understand to the ultimate extent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just understandably, as hardware gets out of date, their according drivers get out of date, and then since I guess we don't really have any interaction with whoever creates those drivers, we kind of sit here and hope. And I'm assuming like shoot for a compromise.
We have interactions. We have great relationships with really all hardware vendors, but even they on mobile, it's difficult. It's kind of a sad story. So not on Apple devices. Apple is in an interesting position where they control the entire stack, right? So if like you have a problem, you go talk to Apple. There's nobody else you have to talk to. They used to use different companies used to build hardware for Apple devices. But if you get a modern Apple phone, everything important inside this phone, like maybe not the modem, I'm not sure, but everything important like the CPU, the GPU, a lot of the microcontrollers, operating systems, drivers, like all of this is written by Apple engineers or designed by Apple hardware engineers. So in that sense, Apple is fantastic to work with, because they always know all the answers. And if you have good relationships with them, you can know what you have to do. And they have an aggressive update policy. I think it's not even up to the carrier. I think if you get an iPhone, you just get latest OS update. But then when you talk about Android, it's really difficult, because there is the company that makes the device, like Samsung, right? And then there's the carrier that you're with, and then there's the company that makes the graphics chip inside the device and writes graphics drivers for this. And so A, there's just many entities involved. B, there's just not this constant push for updates. If you buy a phone that's 3 years old, maybe you can't even install the latest OS on this, because it has a 2-year support sort of guarantee, and not in the warranty sense, but in the sort of software obsolescence sense. And after this is done, but we have to deal with this, because again, right, for us, it's kind of interesting. I think we always had this mentality, but now as we are really big, like very small relative numbers are really scarily huge. Like you think, oh, there's just like 1% of users that have this device. Well, that's a lot of people at the scale we are right now. And so all of these decisions are very difficult, right? If the game doesn't work for some people, what do? We can't spend infinite amount of engineering. This problem literally could suck in infinite amount of engineering. We don't have this luxury, right? So we have to cut things off at some point. But it's a lot of difficult decisions, and it's a complicated. It's an interesting space, right? But this is kind of this is part of why, right? So we started this. Or I mentioned that, for example, Future is Bright took a while. Well, this is part of the difference between anything that you don't hack with and anything that you actually ship in production. It's kind of the scale, the robustness, the degree of polish in individual components. These things are why some projects just take much more time than it takes to build an interesting demo.
Because I'm not really up on my lingo, but does Roblox use direct illumination?
So yeah, the sort of it's a bit a lot of these terms are a bit murky. We usually you would classify this as direct illumination from various light sources, including the sun and sort of other usually point light sources. Then you would usually have an indirect illumination as an ambient term. So this is the impact of light sort of reflected around the environment. And then sometimes you would also have, it gets difficult. People, I don't think, usually classify GI as ambient necessarily. So then there's potentially a separate, ambient would be more like a gross overall approximation of the lighting environment, and GI would be more precise, like light is shining on this wall and it is bouncing around, and there's like a bit of the reflection of that light from the wall on other objects. But then there's also things like sky. If you think about the sky, we don't think about this way usually because there is the sun in the sky and it's bright and kind of is the center of attention. But if you remove the sun from the sky still acts sort of as a light source, but it's a complex light source in the sense that if you have, it's like the entire hemisphere emits light, and if you have cloud coverage somewhere, then that's different. And if you have atmospheric density or turbidity or whatever, like, if you have a lot of dust particles in the air, if you have a lot of water particles in the air, all of these things are a bit different. And then, like obvious things, if you have a sunset, which is sort of the sun, but the sun can be barely visible in the actual sunset, but you still have a lot of sort of red, yellow parts of the sky. And then if you look at an object, then the side of this that is aligned to where the sunset is would be reddish or yellowish. And so there's a lot of different kind of types of light sources. And so, if you think about light from the sky, is it direct illumination? Well, you could maybe treat it like direct illumination, but really it's a bit more difficult. So it's hard to categorize this as precisely, I would say. So we do use direct illumination. We do try to simulate light from the sky in a somewhat limited way, and we try to do ambient occlusion, which is a very simple form of GI, but we don't have full-blown GI with like light bounces and things like that yet.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's a difficult topic, in part because I think as an industry we haven't always agreed on the terms that are like straightforward. Ambient is interesting. Ambient term, which again is sort of the average impact of reflected light, I guess, from the environment onto an object from the light sources on the object. It has existed for decades. Like you can look at OpenGL 1.0 from, I don't know, how old is OpenGL, like 1990 or something, 1995? I don't know. And there's an ambient term there, but there it's a single color. And the world is complex. It's not a single color. So all of these things are approximations, right? And, sometimes we can talk about a single term like ambient and, oh, did games 20 years ago do that? Of course they did. But they used the models so simple that the impact of this wasn't very interesting, wasn't very significant, right? Then, the next generation of games started doing ambient occlusion. But they did it in a very, again, limited way, where you have this classical sort of game ambient occlusion effect, where if you have an object that's really close to the wall, you sort of see a shadow behind it, which is a very gross approximation of what should really happen in reality. And then people started doing more complex things, etc., etc. But the point is, it is very hard to point at a renderer and says, oh, it does, like, it uses it does it, for example, it represents feature X correctly, because everything that we do, everything that every engine is doing and has done for the last 10 years and will do for the next 10 years is approximations. It's just kind of, to what extent are they close to reality, is the question.
Speaking of features that may be rolled out soon, you did a talk last December for SIGGRAPH, where, well, for one, you touched on water rendering and hinted that better shorelines may be coming soon, as well as improved texture mapping and higher fidelity shading.
Yeah, for sure. We have so the short answer is yes, right? The longer answer is, so the space of things we could be doing to improve rendering quality is like super large. We could look at every area and ask kind of questions around, are we comfortable with where it is today? Where do we want it to go? But the question is always what to focus on. So we did decide, I think, for this year that we are going to put more focus on the outdoor, which includes clouds, which includes sky, which includes terrain, and a few other things. Now, I'm not actually sure about the shorelines at the moment. We do have plans for all of the other improvements around terrain. We want sort of higher quality geometry for terrain, higher quality materials for terrain. Vegetation is also something that we shipped. It's nice, but it could use a visual upgrade as well. So all of these things are on the horizon, right? In the future, there's definitely in the future we want to do all of the things. It's just a question of when. So yeah, I think shoreline specifically, I just we had some discussions around some better water shading. I just don't remember if it included shorelines or not. But yeah, all of these things are things that, everything is on the vision board. I think for us, it's always the question of, are we doing this year or not, right? And yeah, so some of these things we are doing this year, which is going to be good. I should mention, by the way, a lot of people, so I have been, because I've been at Roblox for so long and have done a lot of these projects and have started a lot of these projects, I think a lot of people think about me as the rendering person at Roblox. This actually hasn't been true for a couple of years now. We have a team. We have a different person who leads that team. They're like an expert. They co-authored one of the very sort of respectable books on real-time rendering called Real-Time Rendering. And so there's the team that's doing the work, and there's people who drive the work. I'm still there, so I have a lot of context on kind of how the system works internally, because I wrote a lot of code back in the day. I have a lot of context behind where I think is the right direction for us to go. But a lot of the work that you see sort of coming out of Roblox, there's less in graphics, there's less and less of my involvement, and some of this is intentional. Kind of, I felt like I did enough of this where I wanted to focus my attention elsewhere, but also we have such a good team of people to do this that I'm not kind of worried about this too much. And it's kind of interesting. You can track this through, I've been thinking about this recently, you can almost track this through Future is Bright progress, where, so Future is Bright was split in phases, right? So in Future is Bright phase 1, this is the phase that added like HDR rendering, higher quality voxel shading, and voxel lighting, and a few other things, some ambient improvements, things like that. So this was the phase where I was pretty involved still on a personal level, like, I wrote some code. I worked really, really closely with engineers who wrote other code to make sure that we are all solid in terms of implementation, etc. So phase 2 was the phase that there is little of my code. This is the phase that added sun shadows. There's actually a little of my code there. I pushed the team in the right direction around some of the complex technical issues, so I'm super happy with the result. But actually, I didn't write most of the code there, which is great, because like you can't scale an organization if you have one person driving too many things in one area. And then Futures Bright Phase 3, there is one snippet. There's like a screen of code, or maybe 2 screens of code that are kind of core part of some of the shading and light culling and things like this that goes on there that I wrote for Hackweek, back in the day. And we had to change it a bit, but not too much. And so this is largely still there, but everything else I just don't have anything to do with, which again, I feel happy about this because it means that I don't have to worry about this. I can trust other people to worry about this and to get things right.
Yeah, we definitely had a lot of questions relating to Futures Bright, I believe.
Yeah, because like just me personally, I really like this kind of stuff. I want to get into rendering engines. I want to get into software engineering in this kind of field. So having been on Roblox since about I think 2012 as well, like just as a little kid, seeing it, develop in terms of how like it, I guess overall fidelity and how it became physically accurate with PBR, and then generally just improving over time is very interesting to me, and it sounded very difficult. I remember I was talking to Tohb right before this about just I imagine future would be just terribly difficult to even begin with how much reach Roblox has to reach while also going for this really, really crazy and in-depth rendering system.
Yeah. So this is true. The way I think about this is that for many projects, there's a wrong time to do a project and there's a right time to do a project. Stars need to align a bit. With Future is Bright, for example, I don't think we could have done. I don't think I could have done the sort of Hack Week much earlier. I could have probably done it like a year earlier. But if we, so hypothetically speaking, let's say the year is 2012. 2012. There's this technology, the specific things that we are using weren't really well known. But in 2012, there were already games with pretty fantastic lighting and dynamic lights and shadows, etc. So we could have said back in the day, okay, hey, let's go there. But then the challenge is again all of these like different devices, things like that. Plus the other interesting problem is not all parts of the rendering equation you can even model. So this is direct lighting, right? We just talked about this. So direct lighting, there is well-studied ways for us to model this. Indirect lighting is difficult. And so if we started back in the day, it would be actually hard for us to ship anything because we wouldn't know what to do if we can't do the beautiful thing, the beautiful renderer that we want, if we can't run it on a given device. And it's just, I don't think we understood the space very well. So which is interesting because I actually did 2 Hack Weeks on better lighting projects, right? The sort of better voxel lighting, and the next one is the Futures Bright. And ideas from both of them fed into the work that we are doing and kind of helped us define the entire story, right? Not just what's the high-end picture look like and what is the technology that enables this, but end to end, what is the set of algorithms that we need to research and develop? When do different algorithms activate? How do we solve some of these challenges that I was talking about with color balance, with shadow accuracy? Shadow accuracy is also a big problem. If you have a precise shadow system that can cast a shadow from a very thin wall, and then you're running on a device that doesn't support this, what you're going to do? Are you going to have completely lit sort of insides of that building? That is also not great, right? So it's not that we have perfect solutions for any of this because the problem is difficult, but I think the process of evolution from 2013, right, dynamic lighting through voxels, and then some work on shadows that we've done, the shadow system that went into Futurist Bright 2, some specifics of the algorithm were in part inspired by some of the work that I've done on character shadows in like 2015, I want to say. So all of these things, they kind of blend into each other. Like whenever we do a project, whenever we make a feature, we learn more about the state of the world, the state of the art, the applicability of the state of the art to kind of our problem space, and what constraints do we have. And so because of this, I think it's easier for us to do these complex projects if we have some existing sort of systems, existing solutions inside Roblox that maybe don't work as well, but sometimes they work well as a fallback path. Sometimes we learn from the things that does well and this new technology doesn't do well, or vice versa. So there is a right time to do a lot of projects. And so in some of these cases, it would have been much harder for us to do some of these ambitious things like Future Bright, like way back in the day.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how things play out over the next few years. But since you are kind of like the godfather of Future is Bright, since we are a group mostly focused on building showcases, I was hoping I'd be able to maybe show you a few of our creations from people in this group and maybe get your thoughts on them.
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Sweet.
While you're doing this, I should mention that. So I am a good engineer. I'm a pretty terrible artist. Future's Bright was interesting in that I've implemented a lot of the code behind the hack week, right? And then we released this build a few years ago. What our community has done with the build was completely, beyond anything that I could ever imagine or I could ever do. And so, my feedback on whatever screenshots I'm about to see, take it with a grain of salt, because my strengths aren't really in art as such, right? They are in kind of science to be able to get to beautiful pictures, but it's important for people who create the content to have an eye for for design, like good color balance, things like this. That actually for me is difficult. Like I don't always have the best sense, and I almost never. It's kind of funny. People used to ask me back in the day. I think they don't do this anymore. Sometimes I would get questions. Here's a scene that doesn't, like, the lighting on the scene doesn't look very good. Help me fix this. And I'm like, what do you want from me? I'm just an engineer. I don't know how what colors to select, and like a lot of things. It's kind of fascinating. You can look at a lot of Roblox games, and some of them look much better than others, not because there's necessarily very intricate lighting setup or a lot of textures that are kind of fitting the occasion very well or anything like this, but just the way the colors are chosen, the way the lighting balance is chosen, just makes it work.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is pretty cool.
But it's still nice to get the stamp of approval from the one who started it. So this first one is from Evelyn.
Yeah, so this first one, it looks interesting. I would say, yeah, lighting here looks pretty good. In some ways, the thing that catches my eye actually in this first screenshot is I think the lighting is pretty good. The colors palette, etc. Again, for my eye, looks pretty good. The material choice is a bit inconsistent. It doesn't all quite fit together necessarily for me. Like there's a bit of sort of plastic in the bottom right. There's I'm not sure what this is. Is this our slate or something like this in the bottom left? Like it doesn't all. I feel like if I were to cut the bottom half of this picture, actually I would feel much better about the entire composition, just because I think it fits a bit better. And these objects in the bottom just feel like the material choices for them aren't optimal. But yeah, I know kind of like this. So this seems to use our materials pretty well. I think the door might be different. Yeah, the second one is fun. Second one is pretty fun. So one challenge that we've always had, and I think this kind of shows it, is when you have a lot of repetitive structures, And for us in Roblox, of course, the original problem is you build houses from tons of small bricks and things like that. It's hard to make this look visually interesting. And so, like on this picture, if I look at the tanks, they look cool. The cars, like all of this looks pretty good. When I look at the top, at this construction with staircases and stuff, I don't know, my eye just doesn't land on anything in particular, and it's kind of hard to even look at this, if that makes sense, because it's just like, it's hard to focus on any specific element, and it's not super visually varied. It's like a bit repetitive. And so this is like, if I were working with this scene, yeah, I would try to figure out some different maybe lighting setup or something like this for the zone above. I think everything below that, everything on the ground looks great. For things above, maybe different light colors, maybe make some of this, the far part of the scene, maybe make it darker a bit so that there's a bit more kind of fade out, like things close up, or a bit brighter, things far away, or a bit dark. Like, I know, play a bit with lighting, play a bit maybe with colors. It just feels, maybe this is okay in the sense that, when you look at some of the scenes, even when you look at some of the buildings or whatnot in real world, like not everything looks very visually interesting, right? So maybe this is part of the design. I could see that. If that is not part of the design, I think this is what doesn't fully work for me. The tanks look great though, and the lighting on the tanks and all of that, yeah, that looks good for me.
If I could just throw a bone here, like, I understand with, I think I haven't used Studio for a little bit, but I've heard that with multiple lights, like with a lot of light sources, how do you have any special techniques towards just interpreting, like, let's say the scene has 8 lights down a hallway on 8 different lamps. Is there a way to optimize just rendering 8 lights, or do you kind of just go for it and see if it and hope it doesn't isn't too costly?
I mean, as a developer, the only real thing is, I guess, paying attention to the radius of the lights. If the lights are bigger, if there is, it's not really a function of the size of the lights, but if there's a lot of overlap between the lights, if you have some places in the space, some like pixels or something like this that are covered by like hundreds of lights, then that's gonna be a problem performance-wise. But we try to. So this gets difficult because depending on the system that we use, the performance, and depending on the content, the performance ends up being different. And this is actually where we have challenge Futures Bright 3 to make it run faster, but also this is where just the what performance you get out of different lighting systems tends to vary a lot. So for Futurist Bright 3, the more lights you have that affect any given pixel, the slower it's going to be. But you don't, like if you move the light sources, it's not a big deal, for example. For the Futurist Bright 1, I guess, right, the original voxel system, if you don't move the lights, they're basically free. Once you start moving them, they become not free. But it doesn't matter. You can have like 100 of them, and it's more or less okay unless you move them. So it's difficult to have general kind of answers around this. I want to say this is one of the areas that we historically haven't invested too much time into, and we are reevaluating this and trying to figure out how do we get more performance analysis, performance insight tools in the hands of devs. Like, we have some things, right? And some of them are easy to use, some of them are hard to use, like Microprofiler. But, some of them give you a lot of information like Microprofiler does, some of them don't give you much. But it is difficult. You could ask questions like, hey, why my game is rendering slowly? Like, why? It's hard to answer this question. We don't have tools for that. Or why is my physics simulation slow? Well, maybe you have a lot of unanchored objects somewhere that generate a lot of collisions and a lot of sort of objects bouncing around that you just don't see, but it's hard to highlight that. So we plan to spend more effort on tools like this that kind of surface performance issues. but this is an area that right now, unfortunately, there's like not a lot of great answers for questions like that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is cool. Is this from Neon District?
Oh, no, it is not. But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot to say about this one.
just looks good.
So, I think there are parts of this that aren't perfect, but I think most of them are. Our technology is lacking. For example, the reflection on the car it looks a bit weird, but we are actually working on this problem as one of the things that we are doing right now, how to get better local reflections on objects. Exactly because we started doing more PBR, we started doing more realistic materials. A lot of things reflect in the real world, even if it's not a lot. Suddenly, the quality of the reflection system is super important for shading. So that is not that kind of catches my eye, but it's been unnatural. Like not the closest car actually, but like the next car in the view. Yeah, I don't know. In general, though, I like this. Doesn't seem. Not sure if this was. I'm not sure if this is image compression or if it just was taken without anti-aliasing or something like this. But maybe it's our algorithm. It doesn't matter. In general, I like this. One other interesting thing that again I think we are just not fantastic at this right now. The ground looks a bit. So it looks good, but it looks a bit sad and empty. Like no rates, not much garbage on the ground. Maybe this is good. Maybe there was a cleaner that cleaned it up, but it looks a bit empty to me. Which these things are easy to fix, right? These things don't require sort of better technology. They just require more placement, more objects, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. Overall, though, I like this a lot. There's definitely some deficiencies. I think a lot of them are deficiencies of the engine that come up when you look close by. But yeah, like I think in some cases our anti-aliasing doesn't seem to work very well. In some cases, right, sort of like reflection system, things like that. But yeah, overall I like this a lot though. It's kind of interesting. I feel like so this is maybe what I was saying about the contrast. If I look at these pictures not zoomed in, if I look at the second and the third one looks awesome. And the second one looks a bit generic. So when I zoom in, I start to see detail on the tanks and things like this, and that looks cool. But before I zoom in, it dilutes a bit, which I've noticed. So one thing that we've gotten kind of much better at in the last 2 years is that whenever you look at the Roblox, whenever you look at good showcases or some games, some footage from games as well, whenever you look at them on Twitter now, it usually looks pretty good. And now it doesn't mean the game looks amazing necessarily, but it means that kind of the quality of our renderer and the quality of content that devs produce starts to surpass the Twitter's compression algorithm. So to see the imperfections, you really have to look at the real thing in some cases, which is cool. I've been playing the game, what's it called, Hellreaver, a bit in the last sort of few weeks. It's Roblox game that looks like it's heavily inspired, let's put it this way, by the recent Doom 2016, like super fast-paced, etc. And that, I must say, so when you look at videos of this game on Twitter, it's like pretty mind-blowing. It's really good. When you play this on full screen, on like a large monitor, okay, yeah, you start to see, okay, there's like LED popping here, which is our fault. There's materials kind of imperfections here and there, which I think is maybe not enough time spent on this on the developer side. Like sometimes maybe lighting doesn't work as well as it could. Sometimes the special effects don't work as well as they could, things like that. So you start seeing this in all imperfections, but by and large, I think some of the games look pretty amazing these days, especially if depends on what your baseline is, right? If your baseline is like AAA games that ship that take 7 years to develop, ship on insane budgets like tens of millions of dollars to produce, then yeah, I mean, they try to reach movie quality. We are far away from movie quality. But overall, though, I'm pretty happy with a lot of the game sort of rendering that we see today on Roblox.
Now that you've pointed all those things out, I don't think I can unsee them.
Sorry about that. I already made this disclaimer, but yeah, like I would never be able to make any one of the screenshots. So my claim to fame is I take content that other people produced and try to find ways to make it look super awesome. It is not to be able to actually make things like that from scratch, which I think is good. I think in Roblox, it's actually, you see this dynamic, not just between us as a platform creator and developers, but also within developer groups, right? There is specialization, et cetera. And in fact, I think this is kind of this is one of the actually, maybe one other big difference between the Roblox from 2012 and the Roblox of today. Roblox from 2012, almost all games were just solo. There's a single person, they know how to script, they know how to build. Sometimes they don't know how to script very well, so the game doesn't work very well. Sometimes they don't know how to build very well, so the game works fine, but it's kind of like very plain and not interesting. But yeah, I think at this point, most games that are engaging, that people play, that people find fun, a lot of them are built by groups of people, which is awesome. We are trying to encourage more of that.
Well, I think you said once that you enjoy working on game technology, but you never liked working on actual games, right?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of there's a few things, right? One is I like solving these sort of fundamental, low-level, complex problems, and you just usually, when you work on a specific game, the product that you're working on, like the end result, is the game itself, and the technology is very, very secondary. And if it works in a given game, no matter what imperfections this technology has, all of this doesn't matter as long as you can make it work within the game, right? And I kind of always, this leads to some other unfortunate side effects. When you work in a typical gaming studio, in a lot of cases, not universally, none of these are sort of ground truths, but when your end product is the game, then you start paying a bit less attention to the correctness of the code. Like if it happens to work for this case, it's fine. You can take shortcuts, and again, it's fine. Because fundamentally you ship the game and then you move to the next game, and then sometimes you reuse some of this technology and sometimes you don't. And yeah, for me, I just always found it kind of more interesting to focus on the core. But the other big thing for me is the multiplicative effect, right? Like when you work on, it's kind of the meta. In a lot of ways, Roblox, I feel like, is trying to see how many levels of meta can you really be removed from the problem to still make it work. Like if you work on a game, of course, you can reach millions of people, right? But then if you work on the technology that powers the game, and then if there's a lot of other games that run on the same technology, and these games reach millions of people, then, maybe you're reaching tens of millions of people with your technology. And then you can go sort of a bit further away still. But yeah, for me, I think it was always how do I focus on the core fundamentals of the problem? B, how do I get this technology in the hands of the maximum amount of people to then let them achieve their dreams and desires, instead of kind of me having a story, a game genre, a mechanic, etc., that I'm trying to reach, and then kind of optimizing for that.
Well, I guess it'd be hard to get bored, right? Because there's always something to improve on.
This is definitely part of this. This is actually why I didn't stay to work on the next FIFA, because I worked on this for like a bit more than a year, and there's like some innovation that happens there, but fundamentally it's the same game year after year. Now, this is definitely not the case in some other. This is to some extent specific to just the sports genre, right? Like when the rules of the game are set for you, what can you really do? It's not like you can have like an alien planet, and 100 versus 100 soccer match in an alien planet. Although, so I mentioned I worked on FIFA Street before Roblox. This was actually fun because it explored some of the things that FIFA traditionally doesn't do. Like if you think about the soccer, professional soccer, the stadium is always like there's a field is of a given size. It's made out of grass. Like there's nothing that changes other than the construction of the building around the field. And on Street, it was actually fun. We had a level in my hometown, actually my home city, St. Petersburg in Russia, that was on a bridge, because it's sort of street soccer, right? So like you don't have to have a lot of space. So you can imagine. I mean, I've never seen people play on bridges. People play soccer on bridges in St. Petersburg, but you could imagine this in theory being the case. And so that makes it kind of fun because there's a bit more use cases for the tech. But yeah, fundamentally, I kind of got bored, and then I left, and then I went to Roblox because I thought, well, I will probably not get bored here, and here I am, more than 8 years later, still not bored. So I guess that worked out.
Nice. But that makes sense. Like, I kind of see I think one of the examples I noticed was Cyberpunk, is that when CD Projekt was working on Witcher, they had, I think, like the third version of the rendering engine, and the next thing they're like, okay, we're just gonna make a whole new one, and they don't get to kind of expand the technology from one to another. And instead of
Mm-hmm.
watching it evolve, they kind of just restart. That took a few
Mm-hmm.
years to make, and then let's start ground up. Okay, now let's make a whole game from this. The engine unfortunately had problems on a release, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like realizing that you're able to basically invest, X amount of time and watch a project, or I guess inherently watch, this engine develop for this amount of time while still improving
Mm-hmm.
it is very interesting and really cool.
It is interesting. It is humbling in a lot of ways. Like you get to live with the mistakes that you have committed.
Yeah.
Not always. Like sometimes you
Hmm.
have the opportunity to fix them, but it is, in that sense, it is difficult. But also, yeah, like the view um, changes pretty substantially. The view on kind of the development process and such. Now, I should mention most teams that work, most like again like AAA game teams in the industry that work on their own technology, they usually do have an idea of continuity. Like I don't think Cyberpunk engine started from scratch. I just think it's the case that they needed so many changes to what they had on Witcher that and they were so ambitious um, in kind of what they were trying to achieve from the technical perspective, not from the game. I think the game could have worked without all of the crazy issues that I still haven't played the game, by the way, so no spoilers, please. But it's on my short list. But
Hmm.
so like I think they could have made the game on the rendering engine, perhaps of Witcher 3, maybe, but it would not be nearly the same game from the graphics quality perspective, etc. So you always build on what you had before, but when you work on specific games, I think you often get an opportunity to just say, let me just rebuild some of these things from scratch. And sometimes it's good because you get to learn from the past mistakes, but sometimes it's actually bad because there's this fascinating thing called the second system effect in I think this is a term from the software industry. I don't think it's from the general engineering. I think it's from the software industry. The second system effect is basically when you have a system and it has flaws. It works sort of, but it does the job, but it has flaws. And then you set out to build a new version of the system, and your claim is, well, it's going to be awesome because we have committed all possible mistakes that we could have in the old system. So the second one is going to be like a drastic improvement. But then it actually turns out to be worse. And one of the reasons why is that you actually forget about the fact that the problems that you were solving in the old system, they were legitimately difficult problems that are just hard to solve. And you may think, well, I won't make the same mistakes again. But the truth is, you will make some of the same mistakes. You will avoid some of the mistakes that you have made, but you will make some new ones. And the end result just doesn't end up being worth it. And so I think there's a danger in general of kind of falling into this. It's very tempting as an engineer. I do want to say, like, it's so tempting to say, oh, I hate this code. I don't like, it's definitely not good.
Hmm.
Um, maybe because I didn't write them, which is a thing that can happen. Maybe because, in the sense that I think people get attached to their own creations, and when people don't spend time to understand sort of creations of others, they can have this somewhat dismissive attitude to, oh, like, I don't understand it, therefore it's probably not good. But also it's just fun, like there's this shiny new problem, and I'm gonna start from scratch, I'm gonna invent all of these new concepts, it's gonna be awesome. And so this is so tantalizing as an engineer, and in some cases it is the right decision to do this, but so often this is wrong. Like one part of my job that I do at Roblox is to try to help different teams and different engineers with like answering this question, right? Should we declare the solution that we have today unworkable, and do we have a better one fundamentally, or is it the case that the problem is just difficult and we have to innovate on top of what we have today? And all of it is case by case.
That makes a lot of sense. I was an accelerator, I think 2 years. Wait, 2 years ago, 3. I was an accelerator a few years ago.
right?
I don't remember. And me and CJ, my partner, we were just looking at, I think, our trees in our game. We're like, these trees they're pretty heavy in performance. So we contacted engineering, and I think we got like a hockey sort of situation where they bounced an idea. They're like, no, maybe it's this. Try this one. And then a few days later, they came back and they're like, no, try this. This approach might work better. And it's kind of interesting to see that whole problem-solving process of like, I think there was a culling problem with the leaves. I think we just had too many leaves on our trees, and we eventually just removed them. But seeing that whole step-by-step process of like, okay, here's a problem. Can we solve this on our end? Maybe maybe the engine has to solve this. Or can they solve this? If not, okay, maybe we have to compromise. And then that relationship kind of helped give me insight on just how, I guess, game dev works in terms of this kind of scenario.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is actually part of the reason why I gave the talk at last RDC about some of the internals, because my view has always been, and this is kind of interesting in that Roblox doesn't always work in the same way, in the sense that we don't give people access to the internals directly in the engine, and a lot of this is for a good reason. My view, though, has always been that the more complete is your understanding of the layers that you are building upon, the better products you can build on top, even if you don't even if you can't actually like change the layers under you. Say layers, it's in a very broad sense, like, again, I was talking about this earlier a bit, right, when we started about the graphics hardware. If you think about this in a broad sense, the fact that computers work at all is like fascinating, because there is so much built. So like we are talking over Discord right now, which runs in a web browser, which web browsers are crazily complicated pieces of software. It uses the graphics card to render a lot of the UI, because that's how browsers render 2D these days. Then we talk on Discord, right, through like a voice chat. There's voice compression libraries. This is like a hard research problem. How do you take the voice, the waves, the audio waves, and represent them in few enough bits that it can be passed quickly, etc., etc. But like it goes on and on and on and on. There's like the operating system layer. There's within the operating system, there's many different sort of abstractions. Then there's the actual hardware on a high level of understanding, like here's the CPU, it runs its instructions. Then there's the next level under this, which is how do these instructions actually work like internally in the CPU. And then there's the next level, which is the actual hardware, which this is the level where I have always stopped. It's just too big sort of for me to understand this completely. But there are people who are electrical engineers who know exactly how transistors work and how to build some of these how to build a unit that adds two numbers is not a very easy problem, interestingly. And then you think about, so the I'm not sure what devices you use for this. So I have like an Intel i7 or something like this processor. I think it's a 14 nanometer processor, which is completely crazy if you think about the scale of this individual transistors. like 14 nanometer is very, very, very small. It's
Yeah.
like incomprehensibly small. The fact that humanity can even build such a thing and then have it work reliably is crazy. And so I've always believed that the more of this you understand, the better end product you can build, in the sense that, you are writing a program. Cool, the program is using this framework. Oh, the program is misbehaving. Why is this? Well, maybe I don't understand something about the framework, about the performance, about the behavior, about the constraints, etc. If I know about them, I can work around them, or I can design my program to fit these constraints better. And then it goes on and on and on and on and on, right? And so this is part of why I gave the talk that I gave, because it always felt to me that, it's super valuable to educate people about the intricate behavior of all of these different sort of pieces of software that the world ends up running on top of.
Right. Yeah, and like I remember, I think I'm a computer engineer, which means I learned some EE and some CS. And I think for one of my EE classes, I had to make an adder, which at first I'm like, oh, it's easy, it's fine. But we had to make it from scratch. So I think I used like 20 transistors and
Mm-hmm.
this horrible mess on like a dope sheet. So like the lowest possible level the computers got in terms of
Mm-hmm.
computing how to add. Okay, that was a pain. And then my next class, I had to learn about computer architecture and interpreting just, okay, what does it mean to compile, analog signal, turn that into, okay, numbers, like turn that into maybe anything we can interpret as humans. And it gets really
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And it is interesting seeing how many of the layers and how many pieces have to work just for, your screen to turn on, for like the UI to move a little bit. Like it is very cool, but it hurts my head a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tope. That was a, a bit of a rant.
No worries. Maybe I can hire you to build me a computer because I'm getting tired of this MacBook.
Build me a computer. My laptop is struggling sometimes.
We can share. I got a couple more images because I'll feel bad if I leave anyone out. First one is from I don't know how to pronounce his name. Gesaff or whatever.
I couldn't
You know
tell
what I'm
you if I
talking
knew.
about?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just one of our other members in our little group.
Yeah. So this is interesting. It's pretty clean. There is the biggest thing that stands out to me is, and this is what we had. Oh, we didn't. I don't remember now. I thought we were going to ship like a feature that helps with this, but maybe we haven't. But the biggest thing that stands out to me is the light fixtures. The shadow from the light fixtures on the ceiling is like. So this is kind of we talked about global illumination, direct illumination, things like this. This is a difficult sort of problem where, like, you can see effects like this in real life, of course. Like if you have a large light fixture, you will see a shadow on the ceiling. Two things happen in real life though. One is because you have global illumination, which we don't do, the shadow that you see on the ceiling, it's more sort of more diffuse. Diffuse may not be the right word. Like there's less contrast in it, just because all of the extra light that bounces around the room from the same light, it just makes sort of the shadow less less dark. The other thing that happens is, so light bulb, it's sort of a point light source in the sense that there is a small, I guess, wire inside the light bulb that emits light. But I think because of the form of the actual fixture, etc., maybe there's light refraction that's going on there. I'm not actually an optics expert, but anyway, the way how I would model a light bulb is not as a point light, but more as a small sphere. And we don't do this right now. And so even if we did that, I think you would see sort of better behavior here. So yeah, like this is this has always fascinated me. I was talking about some of these unsolved problems. Lighting in general is very much still an unsolved problem in real-time computer graphics. In non-real-time computer graphics, people do path tracing, and it's all great. And it's like there's a lot of hard problems there to solve still, but at least you can get really close to reality. in real time, a lot of things that we do is just like smoke and mirrors. Sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively. And this is kind of one of them. But yeah, so like I thought we had plans to sort of help with this problem by defining a essentially sort of an inner radius, like a bulb size on a light, which would fix some of these shadow issues, etc. But yeah, the only other thing is all of these wooden crates are a bit repetitive. I feel like if I lived here, it would be a bit overbearing, just sort of the how monotone the colors of all of this are. Maybe not perfect, but it's pretty good otherwise. My only other question is, what would reviewers say about all of this wood?
Yeah. Be some questionable wood grain going on.
Yeah.
Might be an old screenshot. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't specify phase 3 to everyone, so Jeff Applestein trying to mess with us, throw us off.
But no, like on your comment on like from I guess render, like ray trace rendering brute force basically to real time, it is interesting seeing how like with Blender, if I want to render, it's just greedy. It bounces the ray, bounces back. Okay, both those rays tilted to this formation. Cool. But in like real time, you can't do that because you would never become real time.
Yeah.
So having to
it's super hard, right? So NVIDIA is doing some research on this. Like ray tracing is their big game now, and they are trying to do path tracing in real time, and I think they are getting reasonable results. But a lot of this still is in the shape that you can make like an interesting demo, but when you have they had like a path traced version of Quake 2, which is what, a game from 1990 something, I don't know, 3, 4. Yeah, like a while back. And I ran it on my 2080. I forget, it ran like at something like 40 FPS or something like this. But it's pretty simplistic. So it is early in that sense, because we can sort of imagine that we will be able to do all of this in the future now that we have these cards that accelerate ray tracing, etc. Like, it feels within arm's reach. At the same time, so this NVIDIA GPU, it's like a 300 watt monster in your case, right, with like dedicated fans, etc. 300 watts is, so by the standards of the computer hardware, it's like, okay, like if you have a PSU, it's probably like 500 watt or more in like any modern computer. Like 450 maybe is the reasonable minimum that people put these days. So it's like, okay, 300, it's within reason. When you think about, again, going back to not even just the phones. So we've talked a lot about the phones. You can talk about the laptops. A lot of laptops have like 10, 15 watt chips in them, which is super great. I used to use, like sort of heavier laptops with like dedicated GPUs and things like that. I've switched pretty much exclusively to thin and light, no fan. It's a fantastic feeling, but there is barely any cooling to speak of. If you don't have a fan, you basically don't have cooling. And so you have like a 10 watt chip, 15 watt chip there. So to get the same quality on a laptop, we need to somehow find, even assuming that we can do this on desktop, which we can't yet, we need to somehow find essentially 20 times sort of efficiency in terms of, like rays per watt or whatever your metric is. Which is super difficult. It's like a super hard engineering problem. And NVIDIA has amazing engineers, but even for them, it took a while to get to the state where we are today. So yeah, eventually it must happen. Like, things that we do today on laptops or on mobile phones were completely inconceivable 10 years ago. So this must happen. But when and how, I think, is an interesting question. So yeah, until then, smoke and mirrors, interesting hacks that look plausible to the human eye.
I have one more image.
Yeah, go ahead and blast the image in here.
This is our upcoming group collaboration project that we're working on.
Ooh, yeah, this is the one I was referencing in terms of like a lot of lights. There are a lot of lights in the scene.
Whoa. This looks awesome. I don't have complaints. I do not have complaints. If I wanted to pick something to complain about, it would be the smoke looks a bit lame. I think this is our smoke particles. They look pretty bad. We are starting to do this. It's kind of like, I talked a bit about this before. So many things to do, and so hard to actually find not find figure out what you want to work on and then how to work on this. But yeah, special effects is something that we barely touched in the last few years. We were super focused on lighting, materials, some other fundamentals like this. So special effects kind of took a backseat. So we are doing work this year. Like right now, there's somebody working on sort of more features for particle effects and how to make. One other thing that we started doing, which we've done on and off for a few years, but I think now that we have a good team of people working on rendering, like a team of good size, it's been paying dividends. We started doing more internal projects around, let's set a visual target, let's try to hit it internally with artists that may have experience, for example, outside of Roblox, may not have experience with Roblox. Like, let's try to find the breaking point of the rendering engine, and that's kind of log every single thing that went wrong along the way. I'm not sure if you guys seen, we released the forest demo. I forget what it was called. Realistic Forest something, which is like a playable game. And this is one of the outcomes of this effort that we have shared publicly, and there's going to be more. And so this process has been super helpful in general to figure out, hey, when you're trying to hit really aggressive visual targets, kind of what's the biggest challenges and how do we address that? And yeah, we are doing some of this work now with effects as well, and kind of finding what's the biggest thing that we can do to make our particle systems more powerful, to let creators build kind of more interesting scenes. But anyway, I only really mentioned this because a couple particles in the smoke effect look kind of odd on top of the sky, but this looks great. This looks awesome. One thing, so performance-wise, yeah, like I don't know I don't know to what extent this works well, etc. So we are doing work on features by 3 still around performance tuning. A lot of the work in general that we do, it's all motivated by kind of levels that the community builds, right? So if there are levels like this, whereas like it looks amazing, but maybe it runs poorly on some devices, and it's not clear how to make the level more efficient. We have engineers who would be very happy to look at this and try to figure out, I think there is like more on the automatic optimization side of things that we can do in Features by 3. And at some point, we will have to build tools that I was talking about, but also maybe just write documents around, hey, here's the obvious things that you should watch out for, like things that you're most likely to get wrong performance-wise when working with some of these. Yeah, this looks great. Props to whoever designed. I like the design as well. Like I think it's not just the execution. It's like it looks whole, sort of, right? I think in some other ones that we've looked at, sometimes it's like there is parts of this that look nice, but the whole thing doesn't form a very coherent like entity. And here it feels like it's end to end. The design is good, the execution is good. I like this.
Oh, wow. Shout out to Ray who designed that.
Yeah.
I think he'll really appreciate that. Rafe, did you have any more questions of your own?
I honestly don't think so, no.
Oh, just to close things off a bit, before we get just rifle through a few Reddit questions. Did an interview a while back where your advice to aspiring developers was that they're the ones who get to shape their life and they should never let anyone tell them otherwise. So, do you have any other advice or wisdom to impart on people who want to step into game development as an occupation and follow your footsteps?
Maybe the biggest thing, and maybe this is the wrong audience to tell this to, but maybe this is the right audience to tell this to. So, when I grew up, game development felt like this amazing, unbreachable thing that, like there's this wall between you and the game development, and it's super not clear how to scale this wall. And the grass is so green behind this wall, but you don't know because you're not there. And how do I do this, right? Like it felt like a super difficult, almost elite world. And I feel like in a lot of ways, the world has changed since then, but I think in a lot of ways, even thinking that was very wrong. And I was lucky in that, I kind of pursued this no matter what, and it was actually rather easy for me to get there, to enter the field, kind of to stay in the field, etc. But so what I would say around that is, you can look at some of the Roblox creations that people do. You can look at creations outside of Roblox, at games outside of Roblox, and people do, and this can all feel super overwhelming, right? It's like I was saying, right? I don't know. I look at these screenshots. It's like I have, critique for some of them. It's not like I can do better, and so this can be intimidating. But what I found is that actually it's not as scary as it feels. The field can be pretty welcoming for people who enter this. And for people in Roblox, I think it's a bit more obvious that, hey, building games isn't, it's an art, it's a craft, it's a skill, but it's not something that you have to be sort of made for. So you can just get there if you try. And the thing I wanted to say is, some people on Roblox, I think, have this misconception that kind of Roblox is the breeding grounds, or sort of the sandbox, where you get to play a bit with the toys, but if you graduate, you may get to work on some of these amazing things like Cyberpunk, etc. And Cyberpunk is an amazing game. Well, I don't know, I haven't played it, but I have played Witcher 3. It was an amazing game. And it's not unapproachable really to anyone who makes games on Roblox. If you want to continue making games on Roblox, that's amazing. If you want to build games outside of Roblox for some reason, it's not a completely different world, and a lot of the skills transfer directly. And the biggest skill in game development is being able to work with the tools that you're given, and work with the platform, and work with the design. It's like you have to make things work, right? Whenever, even outside of, there's obvious things around technology where you're building on top of a given engine, and you have to figure out how to do things. But there's also, hey, we need to build this game around this concept. Okay, how do I make a gameplay mechanic that kind of fits well into that? How do I make this work? Sometimes you have constraints, like I want the specific genre, I want the specific mechanic to be interesting, I want the specific social interaction to be fun and rewarding. How do you make this fit, right? So I think a lot of game development is actually about, given the constraints that you have in design and technology, etc., how do you find a way through them, and how do you get what you want, despite of the constraints, and often sort of because you had them, it's easier. And so, yeah, what I want to say is just, I think it looks scarier than it does. I think for some people, just the game development field looks scarier than it does. I think for some, Roblox doesn't feel like real game development. And I just want to say, yeah, like I don't think, having worked in game dev for a while, at Roblox and outside of Roblox, I have a lot of people I know who work in game development, and I think it's not that difficult in a sense. I think if you want to do this, you can do this, and you can get the necessary skills in Roblox. You can get them elsewhere. Like all of this can work if you want to.
I would imagine that's all pretty reassuring, Rafe.
Yeah. Okay, this is a little personal, a little selfish, but like I graduate pretty much in a few months, and I'm pretty much going to be looking into the job field for video game dev because I just am really excited about that kind of thing. But it is very daunting seeing some friends who are in similar positions, a little older than me, kind of struggle a little bit. They're like they don't know who to ask, they don't really know where to really go in terms of game development, and often I just hear is they apply to 100 places to get one interview. Interviewer says, "Oh no, we want more experience," and goes back to looking. But I imagine it's a process that you have to kind of tune yourself into, as opposed to just kind of apply and forget about it, which seems to be the case for some other fields, I guess. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so there's different companies, right? And it's gonna be hard to get into some of them if you don't have experience. Like it's gonna be hard to go to work at Blizzard if you don't have experience, or to work at Naughty Dog if you don't have experience. But it's not by itself. I think you have to. One thing that you have to figure out is kind of the path to get there can be different for different people, and it's not always the case that you have people have these dreams. When I before I started working in game development, I think there was like a community of this was before Unity, before Unreal, before anything. Engines existed. I guess Unreal 2 existed, but it was very, very, very different from kind of the today world of Unreal. So online game development community, people talk about things, people like build pet projects, things like that, and everybody wants to build an MMO. I think this was the era of World of Warcraft. People were fascinated with the idea. Everybody wants to build an MMO. And it's like, okay, this is the worst possible type of genre because it's so difficult technologically, like technically, it's so difficult content-wise. It's so difficult. It's like so hard. Why are you starting with the thing that is the most difficult entry point? And of course it makes sense. Why is like people are excited about this, right? But so if you have expectations that are reasonable, I think it's not that big of a deal. You start working at a smaller studio that builds not Witcher, perhaps, right? But like smaller games. And then sometimes people find themselves in that world. Sometimes they want to go to the larger productions. Sometimes they branch off. So I feel like as long as you sort of temper expectations around the initial phase, right? Like you don't have experience, so it's not kind of like not every company necessarily would be appropriate. I don't think it's that big of a deal. The other thing I want to say is, so we live in the world. So you are a software engineer, like you study CS, you said, right?
Yeah, I study computer engineering, which is I took a CS curriculum mostly, but I have a few EE classes kind of sprinkled in there. But generally, yes, I am a software engineer.
Yeah. So I mean, we live in the age of software engineers. I feel like this is one field where we are so lucky and privileged, and like it's not always a good thing, but um, there's a lot of competition for the talent, and it's never like it should not be the case that you can't find a job in games as a software engineer. It can be the case that even if you don't have experience, it can be the case that you won't start the company that you're super excited about. It can be the case that you don't start working on a thing that you like are super passionate about. So one interesting thing about my career actually is that my first job was in games. It was in a game studio that I've worked for like a few years. I was still studying at the time, and my first job, my first 2 months, I remember this, was writing gameplay code for enemies in a really terrible game. It's a bad game, meaning there's like games that are whenever you have a game where the plot is the movie, like you take a movie and you make an adaptation in the form of a game, most likely the game is going to be pretty terrible. It feels like it's the rule of the universe. I don't know why this is the case. I think this works in the opposite direction as well, although I think Witcher seems, people say it's good, like the Witcher movie is good. But anyway, so there was like a low budget movie, or not movie, like cartoon, I think, for kids, and like the studio was one of the projects was build a game around this. But point being, my first 2 months for me was, here's an enemy. The AI for this enemy is supposed to find the player, and if you are like too far away from the player, jump towards the player, and if you are too close, like hit the player. And this enemy can't move but can rotate, so you have to implement like this logic, right? And this is all, for me, right, as a person who doesn't like to build games, but also, even if I like to work on games, this is like not a very fascinating project to work on. But this is how I started. But then after a couple months, I talked to people inside the studio, so I got a sense of the projects that exist there. They looked at the work that I do, like on these projects, but also at the work that I've done outside of the company, just sort of on my spare time playing with technology. And I'm like, hey, maybe we should put this guy like on that project, because A, he will be happier. B, it feels like for us as a company, the value will just be more significant, because he can start working on some of this technology, and improving the technology would lift all of the games that we are working up. And this is kind of how I started, right? But like, if I had this conception when I started that no, like the only way that I will work in game industry is I'm gonna go work on like rendering in, what was the game at the time, like Stalker or something like this, then I mean, maybe I would still have made it, but it would have been painful, right? Because there would be like a lot of, it would have been very hard, just because my expectations wouldn't match reality. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like you can do this, as long as you are thoughtful about the process, and kind of as long as you look at your strengths and weaknesses objectively. I think it should be fine.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate the insight on just the whole, admittedly very daunting process of just, hey, go get a job. Wait, yeah, okay, yeah.
It is scary, probably. I say probably because I have a very weird employment history, because I've never really looked for a job. Like, my first job was, had a friend who was working at the company who was like, hey, why aren't you working anywhere? I'm like, yeah, like,
What?
well,
That's a good
maybe.
question if you want.
Yeah. So yeah, like, I've never had a problem with that specifically, but definitely I had many other life events where, yeah, doing something unfamiliar like this for the first time, it's like a big decision in your life. It's super scary. For me, it was actually pretty scary when I moved from the home country. It's like, it's a super big decision. It's a difficult choice, and it feels like everything that could go wrong will go wrong. You're like almost sure of this. Turns out it usually doesn't. So it probably is going to be all right.
Hopefully.
Fully. Just go get a job, right?
All right, fine. I guess.
You don't even need a LinkedIn. Just go out on the street and that'll work.
I mean, but that doesn't make sense. Like, ironically, I think when I got Accelerator, me and CJ, we were just bored. We were like, hey, that's happening. Let's go apply for that. And I forgot about it. And I think Deepak, he worked there at the time, and he was like, I got the email, and I'm like, oh wait, that's happening now. This is serious. This is cool. And it was, honestly, I liked interviews. Interviews are very, very interesting because we can just talk ideas for an hour at like the super intense packed format of like every idea we had the past week. Okay, let's talk about this and discuss things and problem solve issues
Yeah.
that theoretically will happen. And yeah.
I feel like in general the accelerated program is like super good for. So I don't know that it helps necessarily with employment, because this is, it's so subjective. It's like somebody will look at your resume and like, will they value your experience in X, Y? Will they even look at your resume? Like, who knows? This is a difficult thing. But I think one thing that the accelerated program does try to do really well. And in a way, maybe I hear in where I was studying, things worked very differently. But in US, I guess there is like sort of college group projects and like university group projects and things like this. But one thing that the accelerator program, I think, tries to teach is just sort of making something end to end? Like, how do you even approach this project? Like, what do you focus on? How do you think about this? How do you work, right? Even like abstracting specifics around, or like you're building a game, you have to have a game design, game loop, like monetization, etc., etc., etc. But even outside of this, just how can you take something you have nothing in the beginning? How do you get a tangible thing that other people can use, play, enjoy? How does this entire process work? So I feel like this is super valuable, and a lot of the things that you would actually learn on the job in the first few years is actually this kind of meta thing. Like, this is right. Universities don't generally do a great job at teaching this because there's not a even if you can take like a course in computer architecture, and they will ask you to build an operating system, but in a way this is a toy problem that has a very specific setup to make it sort of easy to do, and you aren't really hitting the constraints of the real world and the difficulties and challenges, and you have a specific problem statement, which in games, especially in accelerator projects, like it's not like it's there. So I feel
Yeah.
like the meta learning of like how to accomplish things is, from what I've heard, from what I've seen, super valuable. And so that even if it doesn't help you get hired, it will likely help you kind of progress through the career and just sort of work on things that you like more effectively and with better outcome.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah,
Oh,
Tohb, did you have some more Reddit questions, I'm assuming?
did. Yeah, before we let you go, we're gonna hop over to your question thread and see what everyone wanted to know. The first question we had was from Odd Development, who was wondering when the script editor LSP would be released, and for both of us, for the life of us, could not figure out what LSP stood for.
So yeah, LSP stands for Language Server Protocol. This is this is like an API, a description of kind of interaction between an editor and a text editor and the scripting language intelligence tools, let's call it this way, that Microsoft designed for Visual Studio Code a few years back. And this is why you can use Visual Studio Code to like edit Python code, and it knows things about Python code, and you can use it to edit like other source files, etc. So yeah, I don't actually know exactly what the question is referring to because I don't know what we have promised people, but we do have two things. We do have two things. So one thing is we are doing a lot of the internal work on LSP, which is going to make Studio just a much more helpful tool when editing scripts. So this is actually a thing that I work a lot these days. As I mentioned, I don't do a lot of rendering work, but I do a lot of the programming language stuff these days. And yeah, like things like autocomplete, right? So yeah, like you press the dot, what shows up there. The system we use for autocomplete right now is somewhat antiquated. It's like parts of this are built on this modern framework that we are using for like the language, the Lua variant that we use, but parts of this are not, and some of this is not very principled in the sense that sometimes it doesn't know the right answer, but it tries to guess, and it guesses wrong. Sometimes we don't teach it about some objects and it doesn't know about them. So we are in the process of changing most of our editor architecture to follow LSP. And that work, there's not a date for it in the sense that it's not like, today it's not complete and tomorrow it is complete. A lot of these things are going to be just gradually rolling out throughout the rest of this year. Now, there's another possible part of this question, which is there going to be a way to use something like that with a different editor in Roblox Studio? And I don't know yet if anything will happen on this year. I'm not sure.
I guess that's the best answer you could ask for. I can't program asks, what has I thought it was just a sneaky way to get me to say I can't program. What has been the most difficult problem you've solved while... Did I really clip the rest of this question out in the screenshot?
Solve what, Roblox?
Yes.
Interesting question. So I would say that there are two that come to mind. One is the smooth terrain work. The reason why smooth terrain work was difficult for me was that one, it really pushed me outside of my comfort zone in a lot of ways. I had a my background at the time was very heavily rendering biased. I did a bit of physics simulation. I did a bit of sort of some other system stuff, but I never was an expert in these. And for smooth terrain, we were a small company at the time. I was basically driving the entire technology except for the tools. For tools, Stickmaster Luke wrote an amazing plugin for the initial release. So I had to, and the other big thing about smooth terrain was it's a novel algorithm, meaning it's not an implementation of existing research. It's of course inspired by a lot of the existing research. So there is kind of bits of this that are, hey, I need to know what other people have done and kind of replicate this. But parts of this were, hey, I need to figure out what we need to do. And so this was difficult because of this, and this was difficult because I had to do all of this end to end. Like, how does networking work? How does physics work? How does rendering work? In rendering, there's a lot of hard problems. How does like water work? What is our even definition of like how do we render materials nicely, etc., etc., etc. So I talk about some of these things in my SIGGRAPH talk. I've written about some other problems on my blog. But in general, just in terms of the amount of problems that I had to solve and the variety and the novelty, like this was difficult. The voxel lighting work was actually voxel lighting work was easier in the sense that it was my domain. But it was also hard because there was innovation there. The other big thing I think is the Luau work that so there's like different parts of Luau, which is the sort of Roblox Lua, the language work that we are doing around performance, etc. The biggest thing there for me, the biggest challenge for me there was, I think, the performance work that we've done where we rewrote the implementation or large parts of the implementation. And there, this was, it was interesting. It was like we had a performance goal, which was LuaJIT, but LuaJIT is kind of crazy in like a good way. But, it's like handwritten assembly code written by a person who's worked on this problem for 4 years. He's an complete expert in like computer architecture, sort of low level performance, etc., etc., etc. And I've known a lot of things about this general shape of the problem, but I've never done production sort of programming language work before, only sort of toys and experiments. And I think in a similar way, there were a lot of things that I had to there were a lot of ideas that I had to reuse sort of from other implementations. There were some ideas that had to be just invented. And there was a lot of deep engineering work, the amount of time I spent reading processor manuals for this and like understanding exactly why this specific code path takes like one more cycle than I wanted to take, etc. This was difficult. So yeah, like this few things come to mind. But I would say a lot of the big projects that I worked on at Roblox, they were fun and challenging at the same time.
We had Lakot J, who was asking, what is your native language?
My native language is Russian,
Russian.
which I still speak it. I'm like still very fluent. I still speak it, I still read it, etc. But it's been a bit difficult. I often catch myself these days, like forgetting Russian words. And it used to be complete opposite. I've studied English from like, I think, I don't remember this, but I've been told that I started studying language from 3 years old or 4 years old. 4 years old, I think. I don't have good memories of that time, or vivid memories, I should say. But for when I was in school and like later in university, I think it was the opposite problem in English. It's like I know exactly what I want to say in Russian, but how do I translate this? But these days I think a lot in English, and most of my conversations and most of my writing and most of my reading is in Russian. Oh, sorry, in English. And so I would often like when I talk to people in Russian, I could just forget words like brain lapse. Not like super common words, but like you're trying to say something or express an idiom or whatever. Yeah. So in fact, I started reading Russian fiction a few years ago to try to like correct this problem a bit, because it wasn't too bad, but it was kind of obvious that if I want to maintain control of the language, I need to practice it a bit more. Anyway, but yeah, Russian.
How would you say I can't program in Russian?
Я не умею программировать.
Okay. I'm not going to try to repeat that, but
Or then my brain, and then like it'll be there somewhere, but I couldn't repeat that.
yeah. Maybe I'll clip that out and put it as an Easter egg in that oil rig project. Arseny SIGGRAPH saying he can't program in Russian, nonetheless.
Oh, so that was a trick. I see.
Yeah, gotcha. Lastly, AWQ asked, what is the most impressive game you've seen on Roblox?
Yeah, so I think what comes to mind is, I think I talked about this already a bit, is Hellreaver. There were other games, like every year there's a few games, and I'm not a connoisseur of Roblox games in the sense that it kind of varies year by year. Sometimes I play like a lot of different Roblox games. Sometimes there's periods where maybe I don't play Roblox at all for like a month and just focus on sort of work, engineering, etc., etc. And it's also a bit difficult, when we were a small company and we were in an office. Neither of these things are true these days. We had common occurrences of, you would like walk past the hallway and you see 4 people standing behind the monitor, and then you join them, and now there's 5 people standing behind the monitor, and then the crowd grows and somebody is playing some like interesting game, and people are checking this out. So it's I feel like there's a lot of deep and interesting content that I just don't see on Roblox these days. But yeah, there's like many games that I've seen on Roblox that were visually interesting, worked well from the gameplay perspective, etc., etc., etc. Hellreaver kind of, for me, it's one of the most complete packages that I've seen, because the game looks good, the game feels amazing. I always was a fan, so I've played various shooters in my childhood, and my favorite Quake version was Quake 3. It's like fast-paced, very sort of like rapid combat, have to be on your toes all the time, and it felt like, I haven't actually compared this, but it felt like Doom 2016 is even faster. It's like crazy how dynamic the game is, and I feel like Hellreaver replicates this very well. So for me, it's basically the full package. The one thing that Hellreaver doesn't have yet is an interesting sort of progression system, like the reason to come back besides just this pure raw like deathmatch energy, right? But it captures this raw deathmatch energy super well, and it looks really good. So yeah, this is my current topic, but it's like a recent game, right? I'm not sure how long it's been in development for, but I think it was released in an open beta relatively recently. So there might be more amazing games that I just haven't seen yet.
I think I saw that your all-time favorite was Phantom Forces, right?
I've played Phantom Forces a bit back in the day. I feel like Phantom Forces had great gameplay. I haven't actually played Phantom Forces in a while. The biggest thing in Phantom Forces that I always found unfortunate is that their map designs just never, like, I'm a very visual person, there are people who just don't care about graphics at all and they can just appreciate the raw gameplay. There are people who are the opposite, where it's like, gameplay, whatever, doesn't really matter, but give us pretty pictures. I'm somewhere in the middle. But the thing I found unfortunate in Phantom Forces is it felt like they found their genre and they made the gameplay work really well. But then they haven't spent a lot of time, or at least it felt to me this way, people who are listening to this and have worked on Phantom Forces are probably upset. But I felt like I wanted more variety in the maps. I felt like I wanted more stylistic variety and more gameplay variety a bit. So just things to be a bit more interesting. So this is a thing that I feel in Hellreaver does way better. But yeah, I used to play Phantom Forces quite a bit, like a few years ago.
Just to finish things off, the last question. Something that's been a huge point of contention in Shiguto. So we started keeping a bit of a counter. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
I am ambivalent. Like, I actually used to be a fan many years ago, like 8 years ago or so, but I haven't really had any in the last, I want to say, like even 5 years or something like this. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not an enemy
Okay.
of this combination, but I wouldn't like die for it or anything.
Half a point to each team, I think. To be fair.
That works.
Yeah.
Average it out.
Well, that's it. We're out of questions. Thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Is there anything we could plug, like your Twitter or your website?
Well, people should definitely follow me on Twitter. Although I try to, it's been an interesting challenge, which I think I figured it out more or less. But yeah, I think when I at some point I started gaining a lot of followers who have a lot of Roblox kind of context, but not any like deep technical knowledge. And then I had and still have a lot of people from the opposite camp. So it's been interesting to find a way to kind of satisfy both audiences. But yeah, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you're clearly doing something wrong in your life. So you should do that. ZookCG. Other than that, I don't know. I think this is good enough. Oh yeah, like I should have known. Yes. Sorry, I take it back. So you must follow me on Twitter immediately, because I am I think, what is it, 9,000 something followers. I'm like looking forward to the 10,000 followers, which is a completely meaningless milestone. Yeah, 9,235 right now. So I need like 800 more followers, which is not gonna, it makes me happy. It's not gonna change anything in my life, but it's this completely like, stupid irrational feeling of, hey, people are interested in things. All right. So yes, at least 765 people who are listening to this podcast and are not following me on Twitter yet must follow me on Twitter. If that works out, I'm gonna be like, this will be 2 hours really well spent.
Yeah. Verbal note to the editor to just cover the screen in the follow button and then Arseny's profile picture as well. Just do a bit of subliminal messaging. Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you again.
That was good fun.
Yeah, thank you, Ryf, for joining and
kind of just throwing my ideas of random things.
Thank you to everyone for listening to episode 13 of Shigutocast, and we will see you next week. Peace.